Okay, we are about to start, but before that, there were some formalities uh, on the welcoming remarks. Well, first of all, the war in Ukraine absolutely shed light on the vulnerabilities and limitations of middle-sized state. The case of Ukraine, like Thailand, we are also the middle-sized state according to the criteria of the size of the country. And we know that Ukraine faced structural constraints, limited military capabilities, financial resources, and technological development. And this become greatly sabotaged when you're facing the greater powers in size. And the Ukraine case is going to illustrate it, risk and resilience of state where sovereignty and survival are challenged. And the second issue is the lesson for Thailand as the middle-sized state. I believe that this panel is going to be giving a very critical lesson for us Thai people, because that's the importance of, we want to learn how the importance of strategic alliance was formed, how the use of diplomatic tools to the counter narratives of Russian narratives, how to deal vis-a-vis the hybrid threats of the Ukraine experiences. And I hope that from the audience, we're going to have the fruitful discussion and exchanges of ideas. And let me introduce our honorable speakers today. The first one is Honorable Vadym Halaichuk, Member of Parliament from the Servant of the People Party. And then the second is Honorable Tamila Tasheva, Member of Parliament from Holos Party, and she also the former permanent representative of the President of the Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And then Honorable Lesia Vasylenko, Member of Parliament from Holos Party. And last but not least, Dr. Hanna Shelest, Director of Security Studies of Global Outreach Program, the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. And special thanks to Hanna and also Victor that make this event happen. And we are so honored to have a distinguished guest to come to Jula, to the faculty, to the Center of European Studies. So maybe on the first round, we have 10 minutes each. Can we hear it from, who want to go first? Vadym, you want to rest a bit, or you can go first?
Thank you for the invitation, for arranging for this meeting. Always looking forward to talking to students and young people in general. I've heard very wise saying as we were in Kuala Lumpur visiting AIPA, the Parliamentary Assembly for ASEAN. It was said that the policies are very important in the sense, the youth policies are very important in the sense that we did not inherit the planet from our ancestors, but we borrowed it from the future generations. The future generation, is the key to those policies, including the security policy, because living in peace is the key condition for pretty much everything, for economic development, for social development, for life in general. Ukrainian experience in this regard is very fresh. It is the war of Russian aggression against Ukraine, as I'm sure you all know, is still ongoing and intensified. The prospects, quite often we are asked, when and how is it going to end? We will talk about that a little later. But regardless, the resolution of this war, how it ends, will have a huge effect on the whole planet. Russia, for the first time since the World War II, started a war on the European continent that was unthinkable. We were sure that the mechanisms that were in place, UN, the European Union, NATO, OSCD, European, the OS, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and so on and so forth, all these organizations were created with that specific goal to prevent such wars from happening altogether. Well, it didn't work. So now everybody who's in the business of developing policies is thinking what we can do in order for the organizations that are there to prevent conflicts, prevent wars, or fix very quickly conflicts that are happening simply dysfunctional now. And it's far from clear on what exactly will be happening in the next few months to guarantee that Russia, the aggressor state, is punished, that Russia does not achieve its strategic results, and Ukraine, as a country victim of an aggression, gets back all its territories that are internationally recognized and reparations from Russia. That's the ideal scenario, and that's what should ideally happen. And that's pretty much the single possible way of actually making the existing structures, the UN and all those organizations that were named, to demonstrate their efficiency. The war's in its fourth year, and many of UN attempts, many of the resolutions and other documents that were adopted that called aggression, that called upon Russia to stop the aggression and to respect the territorial integrity, were not honored by Russia. So if Russia gets its way, and for now, Russia presented an ultimatum and demands that Ukraine recognizes officially all the occupied territories and undertakes certain obligations, neutrality, limits to what army it has, limits to what alliances it joins, namely NATO. If Russia is given that gift, has its way, then the whole structure of international security will collapse. Because then all dictators will get a very clear message. If you have a problem and you believe you can solve it using military means, well, look at Russia. They just did. Therefore, it's not just Russia against Ukraine. It's Russia against the civilized world. It's Russia against the rules-based order, against the UN Charter, and all the system of international agreements that were set up to prevent this from happening. Therefore, we have made it very clear in Ukraine that impossible discussions, impossible peace solutions, we will not recognize officially the occupied territories. We will not accept Russian demands on limiting Ukrainian armed forces, limiting Ukraine's rights on joining military alliances or any other alliances, blocs for that matter, and so on and so forth. We will talk a little later, maybe in discussing the details of possible solutions, but in terms of what lessons Ukraine, the war that Russia waged in Ukraine present to the world and to Thailand including, is that the international system that was set up to prevent conflicts is not very efficient now and needs needs restructuring. The UN needs restructuring, other organizations and the body of international laws and international treaties probably also need attention and need restructuring and certain amendments. That it's very important to send very clear messages to those who are willing to use force, military force, to change borders, to achieve other results. And in my opinion, the major lesson was that it's extremely important to show that the alliances of democratic countries, of countries that do respect the rules-based order, become efficient and effective. Only through those alliances, only through very strong cooperation with the European Union, with the United States, with many other countries around the world, was Ukraine able to withstand. I'm sure you all looked at the map and saw that Russia is many times bigger, has many times more in population, has many more soldiers, machinery, and so on and so forth. So it would be extremely difficult, and it is extremely difficult for Ukraine to withstand. But together with our partners, we are doing that for the fourth year, and pretty successfully. Russia isn't winning, and Ukraine is perfectly capable of defeating Russian troops in Ukraine. But for that, strong alliance, and not just the assistance, the military assistance, the economic assistance, which is extremely important, but also the political support, also the clear message to Putin that he cannot reach his strategic goals in Ukraine. And that's the only way that Russia can stop. They will stop when they realize that the war makes no sense, that they cannot reach the strategic objective, which is to control the whole of Ukraine, to project its power all over the former Soviet Union countries and the Eastern Europe. Russians made it very clear back in December of 2021, when the war was about to start, that they consider Eastern European countries, Poland, the Baltic countries, Hungary, Romania, and some others, as the sphere of influence. This is how they think, this is how they behave. That they, the big country, has the right to project its influence over the smaller countries and to do pretty much whatever they pleased. And smaller countries must accept it. To withstand that pressure from a larger country, smaller countries, of course, have to have strong alliances, have to have very clear and efficient mechanisms in place how those alliances react and what they do in order to ideally prevent the aggression, prevent the pressure, and it's not only the military aggression and pressure, it's the so-called hybrid attacks that both Ukraine and the European Union now are under. We know of examples here in the region where bigger countries use the so-called hybrid means to project their power and try to influence the policies in the countries that they that are target of such influence. I would stop here. I would want our conversation to be an exchange of opinions and interactive as much as possible. And again, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Honorable Halaichuk. Well, our first speaker shed some light how Russia, or the large state that violate the rule-based international law, and then in the meantime, we see that the international organization, international law become paralyzed and still cannot deal with the problems of this aggression and the Russian need for cannot resist, like the way that cannot make Russia withdraw that need to own the Ukraine land. And our first speaker highlight the importance of forming strategic alliance, and we all know that how Ukraine, which is much smaller, could resist Russia for 4 years now, right? Going to be like February, going to be full 4 year, right?
Sorry, can I just jump into this?
Yeah.
It's not 4 years. It's the aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine started in 2014, and it's an ongoing fact. It's an ongoing legal fact, and this is critical for the understanding of all of the international community and all the students here, that it has been already we're in our 14th year of Russian aggression, of countering Russian aggression in Ukraine. Today there is a court, a special tribunal on the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine that has been set up and that is beginning to function. And in order for the case to be successful in that tribunal, it is important that there is no mistake, that it's an ongoing fact of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, started in 2014, and it escalated in February 2022. So when we're talking about the escalation of Russia's aggression to a full-fledged war against the whole of the country, although 2014 is also against all of the country, it's 4 years. But like that, we are in our 14th year.
Well, you want to go second? Okay.
Yep, I will probably go the second before the colleagues will go more into details, just jumping from where Vadym started. The issue is that definitely we understand what is wrong, and the question is how the countries of our sizes can respond to this. And first of all, I'm very grateful for the cooperation that we have between the Chulalongkorn University and Ukrainian Prism. Thanks to the Ukrainian embassy, we established it several years ago, and it was both our visits here and online interactions that we already have with Professor for several times. And that allows us definitely to share experiences of the two countries that we have, and I'm very grateful that today we can be here to continue speaking, including the issues how the Honorary Vasylenko have been talking about, that there are a lot of stereotypes about the war, about this aggression, and about how countries are fighting back or defending themselves. That's why today for us is very important to speak about these issues as we started. So I will concentrate only on three small things at the beginning, and then I know that my colleagues will be able to cover more in detail very important things in their expertise. So first of all, it is just from the theoretical point of view, what to do if you are smaller than your enemy. And previously, if we start reading the old books, it means that you almost don't have chances. You need either gods with you or alliances. Yep, you need the friends, you need the partners who will help you. That is the classics. We are definitely working with these, and Vadym perfectly started describing that without the partners that Ukraine had, without the diplomatic support and military support that Ukraine received, first of all, from the European states, but not only. And that is stereotype number one that we need to understand, that when we speak about such violations of the international order, it's not just your regional problem. That means that other countries that can be very far, they understand what long-term consequences the crisis can have. That's why Australia supports Ukraine. That's why New Zealand supports Ukraine. That's why Japan supports Ukraine. That's why Korea cared about this. Because, not speaking about Canada, for example, Chile, yep, we're talking about in the Pacific region. Because they understand that if tomorrow they are the victim, their enemy will follow the same scenarios in terms of bypassing sanctions, in terms of building alliances, in terms of buying the weapons, in terms of acting in the national court, because bad guys are learning the lessons the same way as the good guys are learning the lessons from each other. And also because in the current interconnected world, you never know who is becoming your enemy. For Ukraine 2 years ago, suddenly North Korea became an enemy. Why? Because Russia, presenting itself as such a mighty state, decided that it needs North Korean weapons and North Korean soldiers. This year, the biggest battle's been happening on the north of the country, for example, and we had 20,000 North Korean soldiers. The question is, if Russian armed forces are so great, why do you need North Korean soldiers? But these interconnections are very important to understand and to see them as quickly as possible who can be your allies and who can be allies of your enemy. Because for the middle-sized states, in most of the cases, you need these coalitions to work successfully, because it is smart security, it is your resources. The second lessons that we definitely learned and that can be important for the Thailand, it is that we are speaking about the hybrid defense and asymmetric warfare. When we speak about the hybrid defense, it means not only responding to the hybrid warfare, that the current warfare is happening not only on the battlefield, but also information, cyber, political, economic, and all other spheres. But that we need to build not just a wall and not just a line of tanks to protect ourselves. We need to think, okay, if we don't have Navy anymore, who can do the same functions? What are the capabilities that we need? Not only what are the tools that we need to reach it. And what is the difference between hybrid defense and asymmetric warfare? Hybrid defense is only when you need to defend yourself, but asymmetric warfare also when you need attack your counterpart, your enemy. So for Ukraine, drones became this solution for some time. We started from the aerial drones, we continued with the maritime drones, and maritime drones is the perfect example. Ukraine lost its 75% of its navy when Crimea was occupied in 2014. At the first weeks of the war, Russia attacked our ports. We lost other big ships. So de facto, we were left just with a small coastal boats, not that ships that you can imagine their naval warfare. However, now, Russia lost already 30% of their navy in the Black Sea, and Russia needed to withdraw from Crimea and to move all their battleships far from Ukrainian territory. The reason? Ukraine created the marine drones, naval drones. And these drones became so effective and developed so quickly for these years that now we are controlling our part of the sea, even not having the ships. So that is the asymmetric warfare. Or the international sanctions for energy system of Russia was not working well. Everybody was afraid to put a real sanctions, and energy is the main income for the Russian war. What to do? Ukraine started using, again, drones, not missiles, because we didn't have that long-range missiles, but the drones to do what? To strike their refineries. So now 25% of Russian refineries are destroyed. It doesn't influence the world price on oil because it's not extraction, it's already, but refinery, that's income and that is fuel for the armed forces, what is even more important for us. So we are breaking their logistics. You cannot break the whole armed forces, you cannot break their logistics and their income. So this asymmetric warfare and necessity to understand what are your strong sides, what is unconventional response that you can have, and innovations, because asymmetric warfare always need innovations, and these innovations should go quickly. During the war and in the military, usually, you developed a certain weapon, you took it for the certification, for the testing, for the everything. So sometimes we present as the newly weapons what we developed, engineers developed something like 20 years ago. In our case, when we speak about drones, 2 months. You have your direct contact with the armed forces, they test it in the real action at the battlefield, they return back their feedback to the producer, or producer spent their time during the testing at the battlefield, they immediately adjusted it, the new thing is coming. Lesson number 4, the current warfare needs domestic production. Even if we would like to be absolutely free from this, but we need to have national capabilities and national production for the most important things, and to understand from where our supplies are. Because, for example, Ukraine had certain things produced, but it's appeared that the very simple things, just a regular artillery, we didn't have the rounds, and we used 40,000 of them per day. Europe, you saw that it's so big and they produce, but their industry was just for the peaceful time. They were not able to produce. France, in 1 month, produced what Ukraine needed in 1 day. And France is one of the leaders. So for Ukraine, it took 2 years to re-establish production of different types of the weapons, or started producing together with our partners at Ukrainian territory. It was important for our sustainability and not dependence on the political will or logistics of other states. So that's definitely the lesson that we learned very carefully here. And the last lesson that I would probably emphasize here, it is that you need to understand that it is not only your armed forces that are becoming important. That in the current warfare, everybody needs to speak to everybody, and you start to understand what are the strengths of other parts of the communities, both domestically and externally. When you speak about such level of the war as Ukraine has with Russia, with Russian aggression, armed forces without population support would not be able to have this war. In terms of supplies, in terms of the, not just the volunteers who are coming to fight, but in terms of functionality of all the spheres. So it is the resilience of the society, of their state. It is the very important lessons that your population should understand why your armed forces fight, and they need to support it. It's not that expeditionary wars when somebody been sent 1,000 kilometers and you don't need to explain only to military what is the plan. When the war is in your country, your population, and your government should be very honest and clear why you fight, why it is important, what are the consequences, because you need support of this population. But outside, because you need support of everybody, Ukraine started to call it the wartime diplomacy, meaning that it's not only Ministry of Foreign Affairs anymore who speaks with the world about the support. We have Nobel Peace Laureate who is asking for the weapons. We have experts who are traveling around the globe explaining what is happening, the expert diplomacy. We have the members of parliament, and what you see here, who became the ambassadors of Ukraine at all the international platforms. And they would probably tell what does it mean to be suddenly there. So that's absolutely different diversification of functions of the classical diplomacy, or when you need a total support of other countries, of other communities at other levels. And why it is important, and that would be my last sentence, because sometimes the governments or their leaders are not ready for the quick decisions that should be done. But when you establish already a dialogue at the lower level, experts are becoming your messengers. Journalists are becoming your messengers. So, for example, in Germany, to allow us to buy some of the weapons and to receive some weapons that they didn't want to give us in the beginning, that was the journalist who started asking them questions like, what is happening? Why, like, France is there, Britain is there, US is there, Germany has very good relations with Russia, or why you are not supplying Ukraine now? And that was the moment when already the Chancellor of Germany needed to respond not to the Ukrainian ambassador why it is happening, but to his own journalist who was asking these questions at each of their conferences. So that's why these horizontal contacts that we are building for years are really bringing the fruits during the conflict or any crisis or any war, because this support at the lower level is not less important than the good governmental contacts or the formal coalitions that we are signing.
Thank you, Hanna. Well, you brought me into what we arranged 2 years ago. We have arranged the panel on the interrelation between Ukraine case and Taiwan Straits case, that what happened in Ukraine could happen elsewhere, and we use the word Ukrainization, that risk could be anywhere to the small state, and draw me to our recent case in July between Thailand and Cambodia as well, because in the case of hybrid warfare, even Cambodia is much smaller than us, but they're very keen on doing the hybrid war, fake news. And the thing is, I think the government want to fight it, just the Cambodian elite, which is the Hun Sen regime. They didn't want to fight the people. But that regime was so great to build a narrative and be able to mobilize the people to the border. I guess you've been visiting, Victor. Do you have to go to the Thai-Cambodian border as well? I mean, when they want the international diplomat to do that, right? To see what actually happened, which is very interesting because what you said about national resilience that Ukraine has been built is very important because you don't need just diplomats and militaries. You need the civil society in building this kind of solidarity to counter the threats from the larger state as well. And yes, it's a symmetrical warfare. Yeah, we all agree, and it's a bit I don't know what to say, but it's a bit unfair and asymmetrical warfare, and the importance of forming strategic alliance, the importance of the way you use diplomatic means is very very crucial, yeah, to resist the larger state. And I think what the case in Ukraine did worry a lot about the Indo-Pacific states on the probability of China aggression or China or occupation of Taiwan. Yeah, so thank you for that. Okay, coming to our third speaker, Lesia.
Okay, now probably properly. Savastika. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be speaking to young people in Thailand, and I understand that we're being broadcast online as well. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share with you a little part of what Ukraine is going through. It's impossible for one person to talk you through all the nuances and elements of this atrocious, horrific war that we are living through. But we, at least as a group, we will try. Our previous speakers have already given you quite a comprehensive statement, and you start getting where this is going and where this is coming from. What I would like to focus on is where we are now and what we have learned at this point in time, and perhaps these lessons will help you in your policy making work and the strategic dialogues that you are holding. So Ukraine has had to learn the hard way. And it's a sad truth. We have relied too much on foreign aid and foreign partnerships in the sectors that we shouldn't have. The number one mistake that we made, not by choice, I guess, but because of lack of resources, was the relying on one of our neighbors, Moscow in particular, in our foreign relations. Since the breakup from the Soviet Union in 1991, when Ukraine regained its independence, we were forming ourselves, learning to live again as an independent, full-fledged democracy and sovereign state. And you can imagine that at that time we had very little resources as a newly re-established country. So we had two vectors in our diplomacy and our foreign relations. It was the West, when we were building strategic relations with our Western neighbors and Europe in particularly, the EU, the US, so the Western Hemisphere. But on the other side, our biggest border is with Russia, our northern neighbor. And it was also something that we have invested a lot into the relations. And this was a mistake. This was a huge, huge mistake that we made because we allowed for Moscow to maintain all the dialogues with Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, with African countries, Latin American countries. All those dialogues were held for Ukraine through Moscow in the majority of the cases. Where did that leave us? That left us in 2014 when Russia has invaded Crimea, annexed Crimea, and then invaded Donetsk and Luhansk regions. That left us that we were completely alone in a world that was unable to understand us at large because there was never any direct talk. So this is lesson number one. Foreign relations, you deal with them yourself. You do not rely on anyone to do the talking for you. And you have to have a clear strategy with every country. You have to know what you are offering. And a country like Ukraine, for example, yes, we are considered a mid-sized country, but guys, we are in the top 5 of world food producers. So regardless of our size, we are feeding the world. Ukraine has been dubbed the breadbasket of Europe, but in fact, we are the breadbasket of the world, or at least a large part of it. And this already gives you a massive topic to talk about and a massive point of interest with the whole of the world. The second point is your security, your defense and security. Again, this is a topic which cannot be compromised, which cannot be underscored enough of how important it is. With defense and security, for the longest time, Ukraine was put in a position where our defense and security sector was deliberately being weakened by Russia. Year in, year out, since the very first day when Russia recognized us as an independent sovereign state. First of all, in 1994, we were forced to sign the so-called Budapest Memorandum. What is this? This is a document that was signed by all the powers in the world, including the United States, United Kingdom, and including Russia. And what did they say in this document? That they guarantee the security of Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine, who was a part of the nuclear powers of the world, was giving up its nuclear weapons. Now, you can say, okay, why did you do that? Why did you believe them? Well, we had no choice. Because on the other side, it was either Ukraine's independence, or Ukraine keeps the nuclear weapons, or we become independent. We were put in a situation where we had to do this. And we signed this memorandum on the giving up of nuclear weapons. Surprise, surprise, come, 30 years later, 20 years later, I'm not good at math, I'm an international lawyer by training, but 2014, what happens? Russia, the guarantor of security of Ukraine, according to the Budapest Memorandum, sends in an army and annexes Crimea. Another precursor to that was that Russia was testing the grounds and was never stopped in the region, in Moldova and Georgia. That's another question. The question for the country as a national country is that we, in fact, allowed for Russia to station their Black Sea fleet, their military Black Sea fleet, in our Crimea. And that was another mistake that we were making by allowing these very strong bilateral military cooperation ties, and that we allowed ourselves the naivety and disregarded the fact that our neighbor has never dropped their territorial claims to our land. So the third lesson comes is that you have to be very clear of who is your friend and who is your enemy. And even if it's your neighbor with whom you have a big border, with whom you have a whole history of coexistence, well, obviously, because they are your neighbor, sometimes you have to be very clear and you have to name the things right as they are and not be disillusioned. The fourth lesson is that you have to have allocated budgets for your security and your international relations. In every single country that I encounter in my advocacy campaigns for Ukraine right now, when it comes to the budget, the first budget cut that is being done is usually MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Relations. Now, we go back to the first lesson that I mentioned. It's not right. You have to have the resources to build up the relationships and the partnerships. Moreover, relationships and partnerships with all the countries in the world, no matter big or small. Because guess what? When it comes to the votes in the UNGA, And in the UN Council, but moreover in the UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, every single country has one vote. It doesn't matter whether the population is 5 million or 135 million. So you have to also account for that. But invest wisely, find partnerships, find platforms where to invest in. But the second thing is that in this lesson is also the budget for defense and security. So as I said, there was a deliberate campaign stemming from Russia to disarm Ukraine and to weaken Ukraine's military. It was done in various ways, sometimes directly by making sure that Ukraine adheres to certain agreements on demilitarization and disarmament. In other ways, through the fifth column, which was very active. The fifth column, it's basically intelligence services of Russia that were functioning inside Ukraine, infiltrating various layers of society, business, religion, the church, the student body, the political sector, and they were acting very much on making sure that, if Ukraine wasn't giving up the weapons legally, they would be selling them in the black market to various countries. But what we find today is also from other countries' lessons, is that unless you have a war already going on, there's no sane government that is suddenly going to say, well, guys, we're going to increase defense spending. And I don't care if we don't, you can imagine the prime minister coming out, I don't care about education needs, social needs, housing needs, hospitals. I'm just going to increase defense spending just in case, because this is security. It's a very hard role for governments to find the balance if there is not missiles already flying in your territory and if you don't have to defend your territory already. But this demand needs to come from society. It's also a very big request, I guess, and responsibility of every citizen to know where you are living, to know who your neighbors are, what are the risks, what are the dangers. When you are giving the budget to the military and keeping your military trained, prepared, dressed properly, with the proper armaments, with the capacity of your defense security sector to produce the weapons which will be used here on the ground in your particular environment, you're investing in your security. I'm sure that quite a few people are buying insurance, right? Insurance for the phone, insurance for health, and so on. Well, military is insurance against missiles flying into your airspace the next day. So consider it as an investment into, hopefully, because you have that military, no country is ever going to think of attacking you, but it's an investment. And that demand for that investment needs to come from society. Because if the demand from the society comes for schools, hospitals, and everything else, and military, no, we don't need it, we live in rose-colored glasses, imagining that nobody is ever going to attack us, then basically you get in a situation like Ukraine is right now, and actually our neighbors too. Poland, for example, where you have 20 drones, Russian drones, who flew into Polish airspace, their capacity to shoot them down, they shot down 3, 1 fell. Then there's Sweden and Denmark with recent incognito, unknown drones, anonymous drones, which have flown into their airspace. They were unable to do anything. Their civilian air service was completely paralyzed. You have Estonia, where 2 or 3 Russian missiles just flew across the country and they could do nothing. That's what you get if you don't invest in making sure that you have the proper defense and securities up. But only if civil society, if the lay citizen demands it. The politician will be able to deliver and push on the budget. Keeping your military prepared, we have to be grown up. It would be great if we could live in a world where there are no guns, there are no weapons, where the only drones that are flying in the airspace are the delivery drones for the goods and products. But unfortunately, we live in a world where already an axis of evil has formed. It has happened previously in history because we, as the international community, have allowed it to happen, and we are allowing it to happen again. We have Russia, who is allied with China, who is allied with North Korea, who is allied with Iran. What is this? It's an axis of evil which has already been formed and which is growing in power. And actually, 3 countries are watching what will happen to Russia. Will they be punished for the aggression against Ukraine? Or will the international community let it go and go back to business as usual? If it's the latter which happens, then they will have a green light to wage wars in all the other regions in the world, wherever they want, because aggressors don't get punished. Aggressors get promoted to business partners. It's the truth. So I think in this regard, it's also up to the international community to be mobilized and to act together in solidarity in order for there to be peace, not like the beautiful world peace we all imagine, but just normal securitized peace for the voters in the respective countries. It's also a very simple rule of thumb, because no one country can withstand when already there is an axis of evil formed. And middle-sized countries like Ukraine, when we are dealing with Russia, Russia is 28 times bigger in territory than Ukraine, 4 times bigger in population. Today, our army is 2 times smaller than the Russian army. But when we started in 2014 and 2022, respectively, it was a completely different situation. I mean, we were fighting. Why are we talking about drones today so much? You know, the drone, 4 years into this escalated war, it has become a normal figure of speech, as if this weapon has been around for years. Do you know how the drone came about? Does anyone know how the drone came to be used in the airspace? No? Okay, so because in January 2022, when us Ukrainian parliamentarians were flying around Washington, Paris, London, we were getting warned by our colleagues and ministries of foreign affairs of these countries that, you know, Russia is going to attack. I was in New York 2 days in the UNGA 2 days before the escalation started. And my colleagues from all over Europe who were there at an IPU Interparliamentary Union session were telling me, don't fly back. They are going to invade within days. Come to Spain, come to Switzerland, come everywhere. I flew back to Ukraine. In 2 days the invasion started, the escalated invasion started. Not one country during these talks said to Ukraine, we will give you weapons to fight back the invasion. When we were asking, okay, it's going to start, give us weapons. No, it's impossible. We don't want to escalate. We do not want to provoke Russia. This was the dialogues that we were having. So in February 2022 and March, we were left with nothing to fight with apart from what was on the ground in Ukraine. So our talented engineers and fighters, because all society came together, and IT developers, they took agricultural drones that were used in the agriculture sector. They took gaming drones, which you were just playing around. They took surveillance drones. They redesigned them, attached explosives on them, and that's how we started fighting with the drones. And then Russia figured out, okay, they're fighting with the drones, so we can have counter drones to fight them, then we will block their signals. Then the Ukrainian engineers came and said, okay, now we can use another type of drones. We will order the cheap FPV drones for $100 of AliExpress. And this is how the drone warfare came about, and this is why today we're talking about the drone as a military use. But it was because we had nothing to fight with. And I think that's the key lesson. Don't let your country sink into the situation when you have nothing to fight with. So I think I already exceeded my 10 minutes. I will be more than happy to answer questions, and I'm very eager for the questions that I hope that will be coming, because we can cover a lot of ground here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesia. You give us important warnings because, first of all, the budget, because in Thailand, Ministry of Foreign Affairs budget is very small. It was considered as small ministries. And this is important because if you really face a problem, you need to, sponsor this diplomatic means and diplomats to go all around to form alliance, to the UN and to international stages. It's quite a kind of alarming to us in terms of budget as well. But in Thailand, I mean, our military spending is quite high. I mean, but not as high as yours, but it's quite high. I mean, compared to other Southeast Asian countries. And what you really warned us about, you have to be clear about who are friends and enemy. And also, Hanna, you did give us that you never know that you're going to be enemy by North Korea, right? So it's come like a threat, like if you be confronted with one. And and the first lesson is also important that you say that don't over reliance on external help or aids, because you need to have the kind of building your own capacity as well. I mean, at the time of peace, don't wait until the time of war. That's very important. Okay, now come to our last speaker, Tamila.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming here to talk about Ukraine. Maybe I do not say a lot about lessons learned because I totally agree with all issues which mentioned by my colleagues, and I have some notes about that also. But I will talk about my previous capacities and what I'm working on. I have a human rights background. I established a human rights organization Crimea SS in 2014. Then I was shifted from civil society and started to work, served as a deputy permanent representative of president, and then after full-scale invasion started, I was appointed by President Zelensky and served during 2.5 years as in a short, like a special envoy for President Zelensky for issue of Crimea. And I think that you don't have a lot of information about Crimea or maybe indigenous people. That is why I maybe talk about that issue. But of course, I will say a few words also about our diplomatical efforts, etc. Actually, Lesia mentioned, and my colleagues also, that unfortunately, Globe do not do prompt reaction on the occupation of Crimea in 2014, and aggressor is not punished. That is why it's the main reason why we have a full-scale invasion in 2022, or because of Russia do not punish about Moldova and Transnistria or Georgia, we have a Crimea in 2014. Actually, we understand that Russia, our enemy, because if we speak about history, it's not about historical revisionism, not, but it's really colonial power. And Russia do this colonial policy against many countries in our region, and of course against Ukraine and precisely against Crimea. I'm Crimean Tatar myself. I am from indigenous community from Crimea, but I born in Uzbekistan in Central Asia. Why? Because all Crimean Tatars are deported in 1944. It's a huge crime. It's a crime of genocide, and many countries all over the globe recognize Crimean Tatar deportation as a crime of genocide, and we thankful for all these countries. And I born in Uzbekistan, in the city of Samarkand. When I 5 years old, we return to Crimea, and Ukraine gained our independence. And during dozens of years, we live in peaceful region. We don't have any terrorism, in this region in Crimea. We have a lot of nationalities, different minorities and religious group in Crimea. I am Muslim. I have friends who are Christians from Orthodox Church, etc., etc. But when Russia came to Crimea, they start this occupation, attempt annexation of Crimea, and they start to persecute indigenous peoples in Crimea. They start persecutions against Ukrainians only because you support Ukrainian territorial integrity and Ukrainian state. And it's a reason why many Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars had to flee Crimea in 2014. And that is why the first wave of internal displacement in Ukraine started. And I myself, Lesia, work a lot with the IDPs from Crimea and then from eastern part of Ukraine when war started in Donbas region, in eastern part of Ukraine. From 2014 up to 2022, we have more than 1,500,000 people. But now we have more than 6 million internal displaced person and near also 6 million who was displaced but abroad of Ukraine. We say it's we don't say actually refugees because we hope that mostly all these people are returned to Ukraine. And second issue which I need to mention that any territorial concessions is not acceptable for us. Why? Not only because this is territory, and not only because it's our sovereignty and territorial integrity, and it's about our international recognized borders, but of course it's absolutely important, and it's important for all over the globe, all countries actually, because many countries in the world have the same problems with their borders, their neighbors. But I always say it's about people. It's about people who live in occupation. Or it's about people who fighting during 12 years on the battlefield. I have friends who died on the battlefield. They are soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, and they died. Or it's people who imprisoned and now they in prison or in occupied territories in eastern part or in Crimea, or who displaced to Russian Federation and now in captivity at Russia. Or it's because of our children who forcibly displaced from our territory, especially after full-scale invasion. It's actually hundreds of thousands of people who displaced from eastern part, southern part of Ukraine. They kidnapped actually, they illegally adopted, they renamed all these children, they brainwashed mindsets of our people, our children especially, and they now in Russian Federation. And of course, we think it's a genocidal war because they killed our people and they kidnapped our future. When we say about children, and that is why when we hear all these narratives about that Ukraine need a ceasefire, and if we need a ceasefire, it means we need to give up our territories. And you hear these narratives, unfortunately. We say not. Because if we not punish aggressor and if we agree to the concession, it means we give up not only territories but our people who are died, who are suffering, etc., etc. Next issue which need to mention, and my colleagues say a little bit, and your questions also about resilience and resistance. It's a very important issue. And we in our parliament even adopted different legislation about resistant. We say about like different lessons in schools, in the universities about how our civilians could do this resistance in civil cities or in occupation. And I know a lot of people who resist in occupied territories, who resist in our occupied territories. And it's thousands of people who resist. How they resist, and not many people know this information. In Russia, they adopted a new legislation. It's called Discrediting of Russian Armed Forces. And what they think that discredit Russian armed forces. For example, it's yellow and blue manicure on the hands of women. It's sharing some leaflets or post in social media, in Twitter, in Facebook, in other social medias about truth about war in Ukraine. Or, for example, it's singing Ukrainian songs, or it's raising Ukrainian flag. All these actions mean for Russia discrediting of Russian armed forces. These Russian armed forces so weak that they think that only yellow and blue paints and manicure on the hands of the women discredit these armed forces. And many people, after these actions, was arrested, was kidnapped, or they fines for a lot of thousands Russian rubles. It's look like in North Korea, unfortunately, we need to say that, because occupation, it's another type of war. We need to understand that if at some territory, for example in Crimea, we don't have very active actions and military actions, it's not mean that people are not suffering. That is why for us very important to speak loudly about that. Because only when you explain this, people and leaders understand that any concession on the territory is not acceptable. Next issue, which is important also, it's a preparation. Preparation for future restoration, rebuildings, projects, but also it's a preparation for like reunification of our territory, because now we are divided. I know that, for example, now this war between Azerbaijan and Armenia is finished. Or, for example, it's how it's in Eastern Germany and West Germany, dozens of years ago, yes? All of these countries are prepared for the future reintegration of these territories. And I think it's really very important. And it's all related for transitional justice also. What we need to do with our past. Because, during 12 years, we live with our people, divide from one part with another part, And we have a huge problems because our people in occupied territories are brainwashed. That is why we need to understand our future policies, how to build these new bridges between mindsets of our people who live in occupation and who live in government control areas. And it's not unique only for Ukraine. I participate in different programs, transitional justice programs, dealing with the past programs. And I know that, for example, we just recently returned from Manila, from Philippines, and they have not very similar but very close problems with Bangsamoro. Or, for example, it's a problems in Sri Lanka. I mentioned Azerbaijan and Armenia problems. In few in other, unfortunately, countries have very similar problems. How we restore, for example, public administration for these territories. How we organize first elections after war is stopped. All these issues we are working on now, and my subcommittee on temporary occupied territories, we work and prepared legislation about that. Next issue, it's the issue of human resources. I mentioned about that, and we really need to communicate also with the different our allies and partners all over the globe, because we need human resources in Ukraine after war is stopped, will be stopped. Now we have internal displaced persons, a lot of people who are travel abroad and as refugees or displaced person but abroad. Maybe half of these people are returned to Ukraine, but many of them unfortunately do not return. According to international standards in permission, not displacement, we understand that near 60% of people do not return. It's all over the globe is absolutely the same situation, because you are displaced, you live in even in Thai, for example, or in Britain, or in Poland, you have your own community, new community, you start a business, etc., etc. And that is why we understand that we need more people when war is finished. And now we communicate with different countries, for example, with the ASEAN region, also with the countries of Central Asia. We understand that we need to establish different educational programs, because before full-scale invasion started, before 2022, we have a lot of students from ASEAN region who studied at medical universities, in technical universities, in different cities, in Kiev, in the Kharkiv region, in the Lviv region, in Ternopil region. And we think that we need to establish more programs about education. And my last thing, what I will be mentioned, it's about diplomacy. Yes, it's really very important, and I'm totally agree with my colleague Lesia, Vasylenko, because she says that we do not have a lot of attention to a region of, we say that not Western countries, but it's Latin America countries, Africa countries, African continent, and Asia continent. And during, unfortunately, dozens of years, we do not open a lot of embassies, consulates, and now after 2014, but especially after full-scale invasion, we try to maintain these connections between us. And we really think that like a journalist diplomacy or civil diplomacy or interparliamentary diplomacy is work. And for us also important to use different platforms, including ASEAN, but also which is established by Ukraine. During 5 years or 4 years, I work in the office of Crimea platform, and I head of this office, and many countries, not only from Europe or North America, join Crimea platform. And for us, such kind of platforms, it's important. For example, a platform of establishing a tribunal against crime of aggression, or it's a platform of returning Ukrainian children, which is established also and presented during different platform also in UNJ also. I think that it's important for ASEAN region also, because when we say about, for example, kids, it's universal. We understand it very well, because kids, or in Ukraine, or in Thailand, or in the different ASEAN countries, or in Africa, is the same. It's our present and it's our future. That is why it's our responsibility. Thank you. It's our responsibility to protect our children now. Maybe here I also stopped, and if you have some questions, I will.
Thank you, Tamila. Well, I did tell the student before that, okay, we have Tamila, and because we don't know much about this region of Crimea and also the indigenous group and how Crimea before Russia was really the kind of heterogeneous society but living in peace. But now the story changed, and Tamila did talk about important thing about the kidnapping, the crime against humanity and against the future of the country. And she did give the lesson on resilience and resistance, and the thought, the notes on how to integrate the country again, how to reconstruct the country. So it's going to be like greater transition period, even greater than the USSR collapse. I mean, after this, yeah. So, and importance of having the mission also very good. Left the thought that left for us, right? Okay. What shall we do then? Shall we get some questions first, and then we have like final remarks?
So before the war, I understand that there were a sizable amount of the Ukrainian population that hold a favorable view toward Russia, had a deep tie with Russia, or actively working for Russia, the fifth columnist, as you mentioned. So my question is that how has the Ukrainian government managed and controlled this potential security threat, like before the war and during the war, without compromising the Ukrainian democracy and civil society? That would be my question. Thank you.
It's a complex question. Let's do this. So before the war, since 1991, Ukraine had the biggest number of bilateral agreements was with Russia. And our main economic partner, export partner was Russia. Actually, everything was basically more or less tied with Russia, and Russia made sure that it was like that. You have to understand that in these circumstances, it was very natural for the whole of the society of Ukraine to be more Russia inclined. I mean, look, 70 years of Soviet rule and of de-Ukrainization has had its consequences. So Russia made sure that even in independent Ukraine, the publishing houses would publish books and newspapers and magazines primarily in Russian. It was very hard to find anything in Ukrainian. When it comes to the language issue, Ukrainian became the national language. and it was the official language, but it was very difficult to not speak Russian, because actually TV shows were in Russian, society spoke Russian because it was considered kind of cool. And Russia invested a lot of money into it. So of course in the parliament of Ukraine, also in government of Ukraine, there were many parties which were, well, very much Russia-oriented. And when you looked at the polls pre-war time, there were also very large Russia inclinations, and it was impossible to say to anyone that Russia would ever be viewed as the enemy. But again, this is not something that came naturally. This is something that came as a result of Russia's national strategic policy towards making Ukraine part of Russia again. And they attempted this and pushed towards this with political and diplomatic means, first and foremost. War was not their number one scenario. It was only when they failed to get what they wanted through this peaceful political scenario that they went in with option 2, the war. Let's roll back to 2013. In 2013, Ukraine was about to sign the association agreement with the European Union. And the youth of Ukraine was very much for it. But then there was a president in Ukraine called Viktor Yanukovych, who was a very much pro-Russian president, who was very much supported from the Kremlin. And essentially, the Kremlin put pressure on him and also paid him a lot of money. And the association agreement was never signed. So what happened then? The Ukrainian students in November of 2013 gathered together on the Maidan. Maidan is the principal place in Ukraine, and they protested. They demanded that the agreement be signed, that Ukraine goes into the accession into the EU. At that time, the polls were showing, very little support for NATO and a bit more support for EU from among all of the population. But when these students came out on the streets, what did the government then do? They decided, who cares about the students? Who cares about these peaceful protests? And they beat them up. And that's when it started, the whole revolution of dignity. Because millions of people came out onto the streets, the revolution of dignity evolved into pushing back on the government, on the president as well. The president was ousted. He fled the country, along with all his entourage, with millions of hryvnias and lots of assets packed up, and he fled where? To Moscow. And this is when the scenario, the peaceful political takeover of Ukraine and making sure that it's within the axis of Russia failed. That's when Russia sent in the little green men, as we call them, their army into Crimea and started the war, the second option, the military scenario. Essentially, when Russia sits everyone down today in the international community and says Ukraine has to give up territory, it's basically biting piece by piece of Ukraine until they have all of it, and they will never stop. So what did we do after 2014? After 2014, because there was a demand from the population, we started revisiting relations with Russia. But even in 2014, the lesson was not enough. We didn't learn it. There was still people who had the wishful thinking and who were still hoping that we can be friends. There was still not so much. There was much more now support for EU. We already we changed our constitution. We put in Euro integration and North Atlantic Treaty integration into our constitution as the main strategy of Ukraine international foreign policy. But then, still people were thinking, okay, we can do business with Russia, and the business relations, they never stopped. And this allowed Russia to continue infiltrating Ukrainian circles, political circles, also about the decision-making. Tamila told you about the Crimea, that there was not enough pushback. That's because Ukraine was infiltrated. 2022 was the point when we already had, Kiev region under occupation, when we had, Russian forces stationed 20 minutes away from the center of Kiev. This is when the population woke up. And now there is a massive policy of de-Russification all across of Ukraine. So It's what does it constitute in? It constitutes in breaking away from Russia and everything that we can. We're breaking away from all the bilateral agreements. We broke up all of the diplomatic relations. We broke up all of the political relations. So obviously, at the platforms, international platforms, we never meet with them. We don't want to sit down with them. We have nothing to talk about. Breaking up all the economic relations. Also, we're making sure that we're independent from them. Another very important lesson is that you maintain your independence in the energy sector and in all the critical infrastructure sectors. So for us, it was energy dependency. And actually for the rest of Europe, it was energy dependency as well on Russia. So we broke up also the church. The Russian church is now forbidden in Ukraine because the Russian church was the biggest instrument. They used the Russian Orthodox Church to infiltrate Ukrainian society because the priests in these churches, they would be specially trained intelligence agents, officers, and in their services, in their sermons, they would actually advocate for the people or urge the people to, be faithful to Moscow. So that's also something we have had to deal with. A number of political parties have been banned in Ukraine as well, especially the parties who had direct relations with Russia. A number of MPs are now under prosecution, those who have fled to Russia and those who have also called to their constituencies to support Russia and Russian invasion. So, and our intelligence services are working double the time, triple shifts to make sure there's no Russian footprint anywhere, but it's very difficult because we live in a high-tech world. There is the social media, there is the infiltrations through disinformation campaigns, there's AI, there's cyber attacks. All of that is still happening, and it's new challenges for which we are constantly in a creative way finding ways to counter them.
If possible, very brief example, very practical thing. Lesia perfectly spoke about the grand strategy here, but you need sometimes the exact laws, for example. What usually supports such proxies? What helps them? Corruption and information, yes? So one of the things that Ukrainian government, one of the laws adopted, each media needs to report publicly who are the final owner. So you cannot say that it is offshore company in Cyprus or in Macau. You need to tell till the last person who owns this media. Because Russia owned a lot of mass media, a lot of journals, magazines, newspapers, TV stations in Ukraine. And you understand who pay for the information, for news, they control the information sphere. So as soon as they published, some of the media totally lost their readership because people understood that this money are in Moscow. Why should we do it? Then that was simple, partially. Also, the second legislation was that you cannot have Russian state media in Ukraine. I mean, at that time, their journalists can come, but as the showing on public TV, you cannot have it. Why? Because we knew that it is propaganda. It was not violation of the free speech or freedom of media because you still can watch it on YouTube. You still could watch it at that time, for example, at your satellite or something like this, if you really wanted. But it was not in mass everywhere. And we speak about the state TV or their propaganda movies, because also Russia used a lot of the entertainment industry for promoting their narratives. So with such small legislation, you were bringing transparency, you were fighting corruption, and even with the MPs, you need to understand that it was not violation of the human rights. I mean, it's not that just for belonging to this political party, you would be arrested or something like this. But there were very clear indications when, during the beginning of the war, several members of parliament traveled to Moscow. Do you travel to your enemy when they're already at your borders. And what they said, so it was enough for the security service to accuse them in treason, to have execution and everything. Execution, I mean, not killing, I mean the process of their court and everything. So, because for us language was so important, introduction of the quotas for the music on radio or the language on which you speak. In this way, you supported your own language, but you also limited the infiltration. For Thailand, that is less important because, like, I mean, your language is your language. Yes, you're speaking your language. In our case, we needed to go to this, not because we were banning Russian language. We can speak at home any language we would like. But we were taking it off from the media and from the civil servants. So in this case, we were limiting their involvement.
Okay, so thank you. I'm Itipan Premsi, an undergraduate student from Thammasat University here in Bangkok. I actually have two questions. First question is, it's very strange, but I really want to know, I really wonder, like, what's currently the jobs of Member of Parliament of Ukraine regarding because of the current situation, we're having full-scale invasion and escalation. So in terms of the everyday job of the Member of Parliament, I'm really interested in that. And the second question is, as Ms. Tasheva said, in Ukraine there are minorities, Crimean Tatar minorities, but there are also Russian minority as well. So I really want to know what are your ideas and Ukraine's idea on how to navigate this multiculturalism. That's all. Thank you.
I can start. The 6 year of service is actually very much explains, and we all feel why you need to have elections every 4 or 5 years. You do get tired. You do get issues with how the parliament is operating. But our main achievement was to get parliament functioning, to get parliament efficiently functioning from the very first hours of invasion. What we were really worried about was that we will not be able to get together. That, for example, Russians would bomb the parliament building, and Ukrainian constitution demands that you hold your sessions in the building. You can't get together in the building next to it. Of course, we would think of something, but even those technical details were important. So in the very first few hours, we had to get together to vote very important legislation, the martial law, for example, and some budgetary decisions to get the money flowing into the security and defense forces so that they could operate more efficiently. But what was even more important was we very quickly showed to Ukrainian people and to the world outside that Ukraine is fighting, that we are united. We stopped calling our factions, like the government faction and the opposition faction. Everybody was on the same page. Everybody was united. We had minority majority, of course, but no issues along the political lines. We had to stop your regular political life. No mass gatherings. You can't go around rallying your people, your party. Lots of restrictions on people inside the country. People can't, men in Ukraine of mobilization age cannot travel abroad without a special permit. Even for us, parliamentarians, we need special permits, and so on and so forth. Ukraine had to inform the United Nations that we're imposing all these restrictions because of the martial law, and many more. And here, the important thing was that I believe we did a pretty good job in keeping the balance on concentrating the powers with the president, with the government, but also keeping Ukraine democratic, keeping the parliament functioning, keeping the dialogue with the society, and showing to both Ukrainian people inside the country and to the world that Ukraine is a democratic country with democratically elected parliament, which was functioning during the wartime, and that our fight is to stay the democratic country that we are, fighting off the authoritarian Russian aggression. So that's what your everyday life is in Ukraine. You, on one hand, you want to live your normal life, and if you travel today to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, you would be surprised. The cafes and restaurants are open, people walk in the streets. All the next minute, the siren goes off, and people hiding in special shelters in metro. You would hear gunfire. You would actually see every now and then a drone being shot down over the place. Then the siren goes off. People come out and go to their restaurants, works. Students go to lectures and so on and so forth. So it's very weird in the sense, but that became sort of your norm. And the same thing for us. On one hand, you're living in the wartime with all the restrictions that there are, but at the same time, you understand that your main task is to keep the parliament running, keep it functioning, and keep working with people, explaining what it is that we're fighting for, what it is that we see as our victory, and without crossing those, without doing too much politics, let's put it that way, which is difficult because here we are, by the way, I'm from the government party. I'm the servant of the people, the president's party, and my colleagues are from the opposition. And of course, we don't experience any animosity along the politics line because this is not, we're not playing politics now. We have a bigger task to do. However, but sooner or later the politics will return, and it would be an interesting time again. But that's me. I don't know. Tamila had a second question.
Yes, I will answer for second part of your question. But firstly, I also will comment and say a few words. I think we have a balance between human rights and different restriction because of wartime. And I don't think that we have a lot of problems with that and with democracy processes. For example, 2 months ago, we have a demonstration about anti-corruption law, and a lot of people came to the streets near office of the president and say they do not agree with this decision of Verkhovna Rada, actually, And that is why we have a debate in our parliament between opposition parties and majority party. But mostly, we fight for Ukraine. That is why mostly we are united. We vote for all legislation about European Union roadmap, etc. I don't think that we have a huge problems with some democracy process. Not. It's not true really, but yes, according to also international laws, we could do some restrictions for society because of martial law. About minority, I will answer in short. We have indigenous peoples and we have minorities, and it's not the same according to international law. For example, Crimean Tatars, Karaites, and Krimchaks, it's 3 indigenous peoples because they formed at the territory of Ukraine, and precisely in Crimea. And indigenous, it's a minority. It's peoples who don't have own state abroad of the territory where they live. That is why, for example, I'm a Crimean Tatar, and I don't have a Crimean Tatars land. That is why I have only Ukraine, and Ukraine protect my rights as the indigenous peoples. It's look like, for example, in different North countries, they have a Sami people for example, yes, or for example, many indigenous peoples in Brazil or in Argentina or in North America countries also, they don't have own state. That is why my state, Ukraine, protect me. When we say about Russians or Hungarians or Romanians or etc., other people, they have own states, and it's according to international law, they are minorities. We adopt very important legislation about indigenous peoples, and my office work a lot on that. And it's a law of President Zelensky in 2021 in July. Parliament adopted it, and we also adopted in 2024 legislation about minority rights. It's legislation about national communities. We don't say minorities in our legislation; we say national communities. And it's about rights of our minority group, including Russian. And we hear from time to time this narrative, and especially in 2014 or after full-scale invasion, why Russia is invaded, because they protected Russian-speaking population. But if we saw at the map, Crimea, southern part of Ukraine, eastern part of Ukraine, it's mostly actually, at that time in 2014, Russian-speaking population, mostly, because of colonization processes during centuries. I tell a few words about that. The reasons why we have a lot of Russian-speaking population, because they displaced person, they change demographic composition during centuries, but it's whom they are protect. For example, Hanna and I, we are Russian-speaking in our families, before 2014. Even now, with some part of my family, I speak Russian and speak Crimean Tatars. My last point, it's about my good friend. He's former political prisoner. His name, and he's very famous film director. His name Oleg Sentsov. It's absolutely Russian surname, and he's from Crimea, same as I and His Excellency Ambassador. And when Russians came to Crimea, he said, "I am Russian, but I don't need your protection," And a lot of our Russian minority group, they fight in our battlefield against Russian enemy. That is why we do not say about Russian minorities, Hungarian minorities. All of us are Ukrainian citizens. It's most important when we say about political nation.
Very simple fact. Our main military person, the chief commander, no higher except of the president above him. He was born in Russia, and he is Russian ethnic. It doesn't change anything when you're protecting your own country. Colonization and the mix of people brought some Russian ethnics to Ukraine. Some Ukrainians are in Vladivostok, for example, one of the biggest Ukrainian minorities over there. This war is not about protecting Russian minorities or Russian speakers. It is colonial classical war, as you remember from the 19th century, but just with the weapons of 21st century.
Okay, Natthanan. I'm a new graduate from political science of Chulalongkorn University. I understand about Ukrainian unity, but there is still a split between the western and the eastern sides of Ukraine due to language, culture, and political leaning. How do intelligence agencies and government plan to prevent Russia's interference in the future? What's your plan for future elections? Because even some of the Russian liberals are quite imperialistic, as I understand.
Well, good evening. I am Kunnamas. I'll be working with the Office of the National Security Council very soon. And my question is that after the war ends, Ukraine will be left with infrastructures and businesses that are very much destroyed. And on top of that, you have a population that have a lot fewer working age population and a lot less productive. So, and what I want to say is that Ukraine will be left with a lot less resource than it is before the war starts. So I would like to ask if you already have a plan or a vision of how Ukraine would deter or stop Russia from invading it again. Thank you.
Okay, great questions, the two of them. That's it, right? That's the bunch of it. Right, great. First things first. It's also a Russian narrative that East and West Ukraine are divided. We're not divided. We are one country. Like Vadym said, in politics, and politics is a reflection of what happens in society, opposition MPs, together with the majority party of the president of Ukraine, we stand behind our president today, we stand behind our army today, and we are united in fighting one enemy. Our number one enemy is Russia. Yes, it is right, Ukraine is very big. And Ukraine is the same size as France, and it's much bigger than some of the countries here in Southeast Asia. But we are united. We have our differences, of course, because, I mean, look, Tamila is Crimean Tatar, I'm from Kyiv, the capital, center, Ukraine. We have a different dialects of the language, but I think every country that is more or less big has that, big or small. So, but we are, again, united as Ukraine, with Ukrainian language, understanding what is the Ukrainian territory, having the same Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian traditions, all of that is the same. Then your question went on to ask what about the elections. The elections are not possible until there is martial law. So first of all, we fight off the enemy as a united society, and then we hold elections. We are stuck in this position. We are in our 7th year of parliament. We were all elected in 2019. We would all love to get the re-election, to do the campaigning, but it's not possible. There are very many nuances. We can go into that, maybe at a different discussion point, but it's not possible. Our constitution prohibits that, and it's for very logical reason that also most of the countries of the world constitution prohibit holding elections during martial law. There was then the question also of countering Russia, and I think both of you are asking that, what happens after? Well, in fact, Ukraine is rebuilding already. Russia is destroying every day, Ukraine is rebuilding every day. Reconstruction of Ukraine is happening because we can't wait after the war. We can't have the demining for 50 years after the war ends. We don't know when the war ends, number one, and we need to live today, we need to survive today. Through that, industry has been cut down because the war is happening exactly there in industrial parts of Ukraine. Through that, many Ukrainians have become displaced, also beyond the borders of Ukraine. That has its own challenges, but we're adapting. You know, what we learned to do is to adapt very quickly. And we're in order to help our recovery, we have the IMF, the World Bank, European Union has stepped up, but our government has also introduced a notion of special trade envoys or reconstruction envoys for Ukraine. It's a new position that we are offering for governments of other countries to create in order to bring in more business into Ukraine. So we have adopted a law on private-public partnership, a law on concessions is on the way, and basically the position is that whatever can be rebuilt with private money must be rebuilt with private money. So we're trying to get these special envoys to come to Ukraine, get the information from our government about infrastructure projects, construction projects, energy projects in the first priority that need to be rebuilt. They go back to their countries, they offer this up to the local businesses, and they bring the local businesses who will have definitely preferential options to come into Ukraine and to start rebuilding Ukraine. Only by building, rebuilding together, coming together against the aggressor, can we build, can we hold as a democratic world that wants to live in peace and development rather than war and destruction. That's the deal. How do we counter Russia not to be doing that, whatever it is doing in the future? This is a much more complex question, to be honest, and it relies on political will. All the instruments to stop Russia are out there already, all the instruments to make sure aggression never happens again are out there, written out in UN statute and all the other agreements. It's a matter of political will. Do you make use of them or not? At the moment, the option is to wait and see. Ukrainians are losing lives in the meanwhile.
There was also a question about population loss and what to do with it. Very good question, because it is a serious issue. About 6 million Ukrainians are living in the countries of the European Union now, and about 60%, 65% of them are willing to come back when the security situation permits. And of course, we are working hard, the government and the parliament, on keeping those connections with those people, so that they do consider moving back to Ukraine when the situation permits. But we also opening up, making proposals and opening up when, again, the situation, the security situation permits, for other countries to also participate, not just with investments, but with workforce. There's a huge interest for that. Many countries have surplus of workforce, India, the Philippines that we just went to. So there's a lot of discussions along those ways, how such investments could be structured together so that the human capital, that the workforce is also sort of the investment. And the last but not least, Ukraine is a candidate country to join the European Union. We are already a part of the European single market. We already trade tariff-free with the European Union. And after negotiations are completed and Ukraine becomes a full member, of course, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time, it takes years. It will be a lot easier in terms of investors making up their mind, because you invest in a member of the European Union. It's pretty clear how the system is going to work. But in the European Union, there are countries that are still not members of the European Union, but members of NATO. And the reason for that is very simple. You cannot expect serious investments to come unless you have a very clear answer of what your security guarantees are, what the security structure is. NATO is the ideal security guarantee arrangement. Ukraine has its constitution that we will inspire to join NATO. We're working on it. We understand the difficulties. Well, NATO has to make all their decisions by consensus. So all 32 countries have to vote on accepting new members. But we certainly hold that issue, the very concrete security guarantees, as the most important issue. Russia will be deterred by force. That's the only way. Russia isn't afraid of NATO. I mean, NATO didn't attack anyone like its neighbors. NATO, when Finland, for example, joined NATO last year or the year before that, and Finland borders Russia, Russia said nothing. Well, they said they were disappointed. They said that was a mistake, but that was it. They're not afraid of NATO expansion because they understand NATO is not going to attack them. What they are really afraid of is losing completely this control over Ukraine, and even worse, for Ukraine to become an example. A bad example for the Russian people to start thinking along those lines. That they can one day become a free democratic country, they can choose to join the European Union or other alliances, they can elect their presidents, they can do this or that. My son's 25 now, and all his life Putin was the president of Russia, he's saying. The Russians just don't know, Russian young generation doesn't know any other president. Well, Medvedev was a president, but who remembers that? Ukraine has a very different political tradition, and Russian autocrats are worried that Russians might get those bad ideas of, let's try having a democratically elected leaders for a change. That's what they are worried about. But we're we are working with our allies, and I'm pretty sure that we will find a good way forward, even if NATO membership isn't possible yet. We already have 26, if I'm not mistaken, security guarantee agreements with different countries. And we are now discussing arrangements with those countries and others willing to join, which would be, and it's a quote, Article 5 alike, which means an attack on Ukraine will be answered just as an attack on the member states of NATO.
Okay, before we close the session, maybe the final remark for the representative, maybe Hanna.
We agreed that I will make one final remark from the delegation. First of all, I would like to express our big gratitude to you, Natthanan, for hosting us here. And I hope that some of the information that been shared, even that a little bit hectic maybe, because there are so many topics that we wanted to cover, they just demonstrated that we have so many topics that where Ukraine can share experience, where Thailand can share experience, where we can jointly discuss, and that just gives us an opportunity to have more events, more public speaking, and learning by practice, because what Ukraine can bring to the table now for a lot of countries that are like us, of the middle-sized states, it is the real practice from the battlefield, practice from the hybrid warfare, practice of the resilience during the war, practice of the building alliances during the war, the wartime diplomacy that is changing the classical traditional diplomacy of the 19th century. And I think that each of these topics deserves a separate discussion and brainstorming how our lessons can be used here in the region, for example. We were not even talking about maritime security, and definitely Thailand as the maritime state has a lot to learn and to be prepared. I mean, learning is not because we are so wise and you are the students, but because unfortunately we already experienced it, and better you would be prepared to these challenges than just being faced to them at one moment. That's why I think that I will finish with one very positive thing, despite that we've been talking about the war. You know that Ukraine now is having the coalition of Ukrainian studies all around the globe. The universities, the analytical centers are joining it with the memorandum. And because I'm also the head of the supervisory board of Ukrainian Institute, so I have the right to speak on behalf of this coalition, those faculties or universities who are having maybe just European studies, but they're interested in doing some Ukrainian studies, so having Ukrainian classes. There are different levels of this coalition. It doesn't mean that you immediately all join at the same level. They can sign a memorandum with the coalition, and the best universities around the globe have already signed. And I believe that Chula, already having so many lectures about Ukraine because of the guest, because of your initiatives, can be the first Thai university also to join it, where we will have more opportunities within this coalition to tell you about this experience and to learn more about what is happening in Europe. And we are not so far, even that it is the 4 hours difference and 12 hours flight, but in the modern conditions, we are much closer to each other. So I believe that we can start this process, or the embassy would be our liaison for doing this, but that would be really a good start for wider sharing of all the knowledge that we have. And thank you very much, Sawarina.
Thank you so much for all speakers, and so thank you for the audience, and very interesting question as well. Well, our guests have another meeting, but I mean, can the student have the photo with you? I never asked any other session.